This week's episode of the And She Looked Up podcast is brought to you by Fine Lime Illustrations. If you love quirky, colorful art transformed into fun, handmade stationery items, pretty much guaranteed to brighten somebody's day, that's just what you'll find in my new online shop at finelimeillustrations.com. That's fine as in I'm fine, lime as in the fruit, illustrations.com. Browse the entire collection or sign up for my email list to see some behind the scenes peeks into my studio. You'll also get first notice of new product launches and subscriber only sales. And as an added little bonus, you'll also receive a free coloring sheet to help you relax and de-stress from your day. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the And She Looked Up podcast. Each week, we sit down with inspiring Canadian women who create for a living. We talk about their creative journeys and their best business tips, as well as the creative and business mindset issues all creative entrepreneurs struggle with. I'm your host, Melissa Hartfield, and after leaving a 20-year career in corporate retail, I've been happily self-employed for 12 years. I'm a graphic designer, an illustrator, and a multi-six-figure-a-year entrepreneur in the digital content space. This podcast is for the artists, the makers, and the creatives who want to find a way to make a living doing what they love. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the And She Looked Up podcast. As always, I am your host, Melissa, and this week, I'm here all by myself. Today is a solo episode, and as you probably saw by the title in your podcast player, we are going to be talking about whether or not you should go with Etsy for your creative business, or whether or not you should have a standalone website using a platform like Shopify or Wix or WordPress with WooCommerce. There's lots of them out there. We'll talk about that. But it's also really secretly about whether or not multiple streams of revenue is where you should actually be headed. So if you know me, you know I am a big fan of multiple streams of revenue. And so we're definitely going to be talking about the possibility of having both an Etsy shop and a standalone website. But before we get too far into this episode, I do just want to say that if you are a creative services provider and you've listened this far, but you're thinking today's episode might not be for you, it absolutely is. There is absolutely a place for photographers, graphic designers, illustrators, writers, and even songwriters on Etsy. I did a little bit of research before recording this episode. I knew that there was absolutely a place for graphic designers because I am one, but I started to wonder about, well, what about photographers and other creative service providers? There is a thriving community on Etsy of people doing that kind of work. So we're going to be talking about that as well. And I think you might find this episode helpful because maybe a platform like Etsy is something you have never considered before. So this might be an opportunity for you to start a new stream of revenue. But before we get into all of that good stuff, there is one small housekeeping announcement that I need to let you all know about. And that is that now you can support the podcast every month with a monthly donation. This is a really cool initiative that our podcasting host, Buzzsprout, has just put into place. It's very similar to Patreon or Ko-fi or Coffee, however you say that, where you can sign up to contribute financially to the podcast every month. I believe it starts at $3 a month. You can increase it if you like. And in the case of our podcast, any subscriptions that we get will be going towards helping us with support with the finances for the podcast. So everything from our hosting platform to Epidemic Sound for our intro music and editing the podcast and creating the show notes, all of that costs money. And so this is a great way for us to be able to help offset some of those costs without going the route of advertising. So If this is something that you think you would like to do, it would be tremendously appreciated by myself. And I will put a link in the show notes to the landing page where you can sign up to contribute. So if this is not something you want to do, that is totally okay. I realize that not everybody has the same budgets or feels the same way about these kinds of things. That is totally fine. You do not need to support us financially. I create this podcast because I really enjoy it and it's fun for me, and that's the main reason. And as long as you are getting enjoyment and fun out of it as well, that makes me happy. But there are many ways that you can support the podcast without spending a dime. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can comment on our social media posts. You can drop me an email. All of those things go a long way to making me feel like you're all enjoying what the work that we're doing here. So, as I said, I will put a link to that in the show notes. And now let's get on to this week's conversation. So, for those of us who have ever created anything in our life, so whether it's making a few beaded bracelets or crocheting some dish towels, or in my case, drawing a little redheaded stick figure girl, there is invariably a moment where somebody, whether it's a family member, a friend, somebody who follows you on social media, will stick up their hand and say, "Hey, have you ever thought of opening an Etsy shop? Your stuff is really cute." And so whether you've thought about doing this before or not, that is kind of a bit of a light bulb moment for a lot of us, where we sit there and go, should I open an Etsy shop? And one of the reasons why Etsy always gets mentioned first is because it's a very easy entry into the world of selling your art. And I'm just going to let you all know, because I'm sure most of you listening know what Etsy is, but if by chance you don't, Etsy is an online art creative market where artists and artisans and handmade crafters can sell their wares, and without a ton of investment on their end. It's very easy, it's very quick to get going, and it's a marketplace that has name recognition as a shopping site. There are other places where you can do this. You can sell on eBay. eBay is similar but very different, different kind of clientele. There's Amazon Handmade, and there are lots of lesser known marketplaces. There are some that are specifically Canadian, some that are specifically for the UK, some that are only in the US. There does seem to be new ones popping up all the time. But Etsy is kind of like the giant in the room. It tends to dwarf all these other platforms, and it is the one that people are aware of. You've probably even seen them advertising on TV or on YouTube, lots of places. It's a very well-known marketplace. One of the cautions, though, with a platform like Etsy is it's not yours. There are rules that you have to abide by when you spend time on Etsy. And we're going to get into that in a moment. But not all of us want to follow those rules. And in those cases, it might be that having your own standalone website is a better option for you. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today too. There are lots of different ways that you can go with a standalone website. Shopify, which is a Canadian company, is probably one of the most well-known turnkey type standalone stores that you can start up. But there are lots of others. There is WordPress with the WooCommerce plugin. There is Squarespace. There is Wix. I think there's even Weebly. There's many of them out there now that make it very quick and easy for you to set up your own online e-commerce storefront. But let's talk a little bit about Etsy first. So when I first started this podcast, this was an episode that I wanted to do really early on. I was very, very new to Etsy. I had opened a store in the winter of 2019, December 2019, because I had several followers on Etsy several followers on Instagram ask me if there was a way that they could buy prints of my work for Christmas. And I did not have the time to set up a standalone site, and I was looking for a really quick way to just get something up so that they could easily pay and I could easily send them their items. And Etsy just made the most sense. And so I got a few things up on Etsy that I knew people were looking for. I had, I think, 9 or 10 sales that December, and then I completely forgot about my Etsy shop. I didn't have another sale until June of the following year, when we were knee deep in the pandemic. And I got a notification that I had a sale on Etsy. It was from somebody I had no idea who they were. And I thought, maybe I should do something with this. And so that fall, I decided to go all in on Etsy and really start to get going with an Etsy business. At the same time, as somebody who has spent a huge part of my career in retail, there were a lot of things about Etsy that I didn't like from a customer service standpoint, which I'll get into in a minute. But it really started to make me think about what it would be like to have my own website. And as a graphic designer, I am also a web designer. It's very common for graphic designers to have a web design skill set. And that's actually what I went to school for when I was doing design. I went for new media design, which was things like web design, Flash, Java, JavaScript, not Java, Flash graphics, that kind of stuff. And so I knew what would be involved in putting together an e-commerce site, and I knew it would be a lot of work, but I didn't really know whether I was ready for that or whether or not it would be worth it. I wasn't getting a huge amount of sales on Etsy, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to juggle both platforms, but it was definitely in the back of my head. And I actually was looking for a guest to have on the show who was doing both. But I was having trouble finding somebody. And in the end, I did decide to open a Shopify store. And so now I have been on Etsy full-time since the end of 2020. And I have now been on Shopify for a full 6 months. So I've had a full 6 months of running the two together and also doing an in-person market. And that ties in to my Shopify store. So I'll get into that as we go through this whole thing. So what are the good things about selling on Etsy? So as I mentioned at the beginning, first of all, it's a very low barrier entry platform to get started on. It's very simple. You sign up for an Etsy account, you create a listing for your product, which involves uploading some pictures, writing descriptions, titles, tags, all of those types of things, setting a price, and working out your shipping. The shipping, whether you're doing Etsy or a standalone site, is the biggest headache in this entire process. We could do a whole episode on shipping, but honestly, for me, it's like the thing I struggle with the most every day. But it is, as far as Etsy as a platform goes, it's very easy. You can have your shop up and running within half an hour if you just want to list 1 or 2 items. There are other platforms that you can get up and running on very quickly if you're a specific type of creative. So those would be platforms like Redbubble, Society6. There's another one that I was just going to mention that has escaped my memory here. But those are great platforms if you want to create print-on-demand type products. So t-shirts, mugs, mouse pads, prints, greeting cards, stickers. If you have a design, a drawing, an image of something and you want to get it out there and sell, you can do it on those types of platforms. One of the cons for those kinds of platforms is the profit that you make is very, very small. And that's because those platforms are doing everything for you, from printing the product, shipping the product, packaging the product. So you're basically getting a small license fee almost. It's not a license fee, but that's essentially, it's quite tiny. But again, very easy to get up and running. So that is one of the pros of Etsy. It's super easy to get yourself up and running. One of the other pros of Etsy is the fees. And this might surprise some of you if you haven't been on Etsy, because it feels like pretty much any Etsy group you come across on Facebook or on Reddit or other platforms where they're talking about Etsy is what a ripoff the fees are. And I disagree. I think the fees on Etsy are incredibly reasonable. There are 3 fees that you pay on Etsy. One is the listing fee. So every time you list a product, you pay a listing fee. It's 20 cents US. So it varies. In Canadian, it could be anywhere from 22 to 24 cents, depending on the exchange rate. When you sell an item and you restock it, you pay another listing fee. So basically, every time you sell a product and you want to sell it again, you pay another 20 cents US. The second fee that you pay is the transaction fee, and this is 6.5% of the total order amount. That includes the total cost of your product, and it includes the shipping that you've charged, and it includes gift wrap if that is a service that you charge for on your Etsy account. So it is 6.5% of the total product amount. The last fee that you will pay is a payment processing fee. And so this is set by different payment processors. The fees vary from country to country. I actually cannot remember off the top of my head what it is for Canada, but it is a very standard, I think it's like maybe 2.2% or something like that. Anyway, very standard. And you are going to pay these fees on any platform that you are on, even when you have your own standalone website. There is a payment processing fee, whether the person pays through PayPal, with a credit card, however they pay, there is a payment processor that takes a percentage of that fee. And those fees are also charged to bricks and mortar businesses. So when you go into a store and you pay for something and you pay with your credit card, that store has to pay the payment processor a percentage of the transaction. So those are inescapable. And when you factor that in all, Etsy's fees are very reasonable. And here is why they are reasonable. When you sell on Etsy, you have basically a built-in marketing system working for you. Etsy spends a lot of money all in the effort of marketing the platform and the artists on it. And so that could be through online ads. If you've ever searched for something on Google, you'll see a lot of Etsy items pop up. A lot of those are ads paid for by Etsy using your transaction fees. They also do advertising, like I mentioned, on television, on YouTube, on Facebook. There is a lot of name recognition when you sell on Etsy. People know the platform, and that costs money. And this is something you'll find when you open your own online store, a standalone store. The hardest part of opening a standalone store is getting people to find you, whereas Etsy has already done that for you. They are bringing the people to the platform, and they literally bring millions of people every month who are looking to buy from artists who create beautiful things. So 6.5%, absolutely worth it. Again, one of the pros of Etsy is you have a built-in marketplace. The people who are browsing Etsy are there to shop. And so it is your job to show them what you have to offer and get them to pull the trigger and purchase something. But that is one of the pros of Etsy, is you have this beautiful built-in marketing platform and a lot of opportunity to sell your product to people who have never heard of you before they landed on Etsy. Some of the other pros with Etsy are, as I mentioned, payment processing fees. Again, it's very easy. You do not have to be responsible for taking people's credit card numbers or any of that kind of stuff. It's all done for you. You don't have to worry about the tech side of it. If Etsy goes down, not your problem. That's Etsy's problem. If your own website goes down, that's your problem. So that's one of the pros of it, is that you don't have to pay for tech support. It's all done for you. Again, that's what your fees go to pay. So one of the really key things about being on Etsy is making sure that you're pricing your product properly so that you can absorb those fees without it being an issue for you. So it's really important that when you do sell on Etsy, you really understand the fees that you're paying and make sure that you price your work appropriately so that you're not losing money, which is very common with new sellers. They don't understand how the fee structure works. They price their product at a ridiculously inexpensive amount, and then they get their first sale and they see all the fees come off the top. They realize that they just lost money. So that's not what you want to have happen. That's another caveat with Etsy, is that shipping, Etsy strongly encourages you to offer free shipping. If you are going to do that, you need to make sure that you build the cost of shipping into your product pricing. Otherwise, again, you're going to lose money. So this is something to be really careful with. So there's some really great things about Etsy. You can get yourself up and running really quickly. You have access to a very warm market of people wanting to buy. You don't have to deal with tech support. The fees are very reasonable. And all in all, you can run a very successful business on Etsy without having to deal with too much of the nitty-gritty of running an online e-commerce store. And so for that reason, it has many great things to offer, and you can be very successful on Etsy. However, one of the big cons with Etsy is that you do not have very much control over the customer experience. It's really important to understand when you sign up for Etsy that the customers on Etsy are Etsy's customers. So they're your customers as well, but they're almost like your sub-customers. They become sub-customers. They're Etsy customers first, your customers second. So it's really important to understand that Etsy's terms of service are always going to take precedence over yours. So it's really important when you sign up to be on platforms like this that you understand the terms of service. Etsy has a seller's handbook. Make sure you read it. There's lots of resources on the site telling you what you can and can't do. So this is another thing that you often see with new sellers, is their shops wind up getting shut down for various reasons. And almost always it's because they've broken Etsy's terms of service. And if you do that, you will get your shop shut down. And when you get your shop shut down, you lose your business. So if you're going to sell on Etsy, make sure that you are following their TOS. Make sure that you're familiar with it. Make sure that you really understand what you can and can't do on the platform. Some of the really big ones that get people into trouble are using intellectual property that does not belong to you. So this will happen quite frequently. So if you are creating things that use likeness from Disney or from your favorite TV shows, or things that you did not create, anything that might be considered plagiarism, that will get you a warning. And I think you get a couple of warnings. And if you, I think you get 2 warnings, and the third time your shop is shut down. So it's really important to understand that you need to be putting stuff up there that is original, that you have created yourself, and not something that you have taken from another creator. Another thing that Etsy really doesn't like is you trying to take customers off the platform to your own platform. So this is really, the only way you can communicate with Etsy customers is through the Etsy platform. You can't sign people up to your email list just because they bought from you. Although Etsy does have some ways that you can do that now. It's very limited, but I'm hoping they will be expanding that. You can't try and move conversations off Etsy into your own business email. It all has to be kept within the platform. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but it is important to understand that trying to take people off of Etsy can get you into some trouble. So that's another thing that can get you into a bit of trouble. I've also seen people have their shops shut down because they were not fulfilling their orders, the orders that in a timely manner. That can get you into a bit of trouble. Etsy will also throttle your shop if you suddenly have a spike in orders and you're not able to fill them as quickly as possible. Etsy will put your shop into holiday mode until you catch up with your orders. So, there's a lot of different things you want to be aware of. There can also be some issues with payment when you're a new seller. They may withhold funds until you've been on the platform for a certain amount of time. I think it's 60 days, maybe 90 days. They just want to make sure that you're legit, that you're doing a legitimate business. So all those things you can find in the Etsy Seller's Handbook, and they do change these things constantly. So if you're listening to this in the future, these things might have changed. So it's important to constantly be aware of what's happening on the platform. There's, like I said, the Etsy Seller's Handbook. They update that regularly. There's lots of Etsy groups out there. There are specific Etsy Canada groups out there that you can join on Facebook that give you lots of up-to-date information on what's going on the platform. There are also other issues with Etsy where if a customer is unhappy, you don't have a lot of control over how that process goes. Etsy can step in at any time and kind of take over and issue a refund, even if you don't feel that a refund is warranted. So there's a lot of things that you don't have control over. And one of the biggest things that really got me thinking about opening a standalone shop, was the fact that I had no way to communicate with my customers on Etsy after they'd made the purchase. So I had no way to add them to my email list. I had no way to let them know about sales. Etsy does have a way that you can send coupons as a thank you and things like that, but it's only to people who have opted in to receive those emails from Etsy. So that, in my experience, seems to be a fairly low percentage. So even if you do offer a thank you coupon to everybody who shops from you, not all of them are going to get that coupon. And as I mentioned, I wasn't able to add them to my email list. So I had no way of really building a relationship in the way that I wanted to with those people. That's not to say that you don't get repeat customers. I absolutely have, and many people do, but it's a lot harder to nurture those relationships than it would be on your own website where you have your own access to your customer information. So that was one of the things that really bothered me on Etsy. I knew that people had bought from me and they had left me great reviews and they really liked my work, but I felt like that was the last time I ever saw them. And I wanted to be able to build a more long-lasting, deeper customer relationship with them. And I just found that was very difficult to do on Etsy. And so that was one of the things that really got me thinking about starting my own standalone website. One of the things that really, the main thing that really made me decide to open my own online shop was how Etsy handled the new digital tax collection rules in Canada that came into effect in July of last year, so July of 2022. This was a bit of a disaster. It's still a bit of a disaster, particularly if you are somebody who has a GST number and you are required to collect sales tax. So for those of us in Canada, if you earn more than $30,000 in a 12-month period, so any 12-month period, it could be April to April, May to May, whatever, you now are required to collect GST and in some instances HST, depending on the province. And so Etsy didn't really know how to handle that, and it has become a bit of a nightmare. So if you are somebody who is thinking about opening an Etsy shop and you do charge GST, one of the things that you need to know right now is that you will need to include the cost of GST or HST in your overall price. This is very sketchy for a lot of reasons, and it is what it is right now. But that is how you have to do it. If you do not have to charge GST or HST because you don't earn above that $30,000 threshold, then you don't need to worry about it. Etsy will collect that on your behalf. So it can get tricky. And as a seller who earns more than $30,000 a year, I was required to start including GST and HST in the price of my products, which is very difficult because that tax rate varies from province to province. So it's 13% in Ontario, it's 5% in BC. And so what that really does is it winds up punishing customers in BC. They're paying for a higher priced item that's including tax to offset what's happening in provinces with a higher tax rate. It gets very tricky and a little frustrating, and it's very difficult to convey this message to your customer, which is something that you need to do if you are charging tax. You do need to let your customers know that they are indeed being charged tax on an item. So it's a bit of a mess. And I'm really hoping Etsy will figure this out. eBay seems to have figured it out, so I'm not sure why Etsy can't, but that's my little rant for today. Just something to be aware of if you're thinking about opening an Etsy shop. So, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that if you were a creative services provider, like a photographer or a graphic designer or a writer, that there was a place for you on Etsy. And there absolutely is. And it just might require you to think a little bit outside of the box. And the cool thing is that virtually all the things that you can do to earn revenue on Etsy are also things you can do to earn revenue on your own standalone website. So one of the most common things that you will see on Etsy from a creative services standpoint is graphic designers. There are a lot of graphic designers on Etsy making a very good living through a couple of different business models. One is creating digital downloads. So this could be anything from cake toppers or party invites or ebook templates or digital stickers, anything like that, where you are essentially creating, as a graphic designer, you're creating a design and you're turning it into a digital download that somebody can purchase off of Etsy to use for whatever you give them permission to use it for. So you might let them use it for anything if it's personal, but if they want to use it for business, you might require them to pay a licensing fee, contact you for that. But that's a great way. Digital downloads are very popular on Etsy. A lot of people go on there looking for something that they can just download right now rather than having to wait for it to ship. So that is one way that graphic designers can make a very good living on Etsy. And it's something you can easily do on your own website as well. There is also a lot of logo design services on Etsy. So I have seen graphic designers who will do custom logos. So essentially, that is where you allow customers to approach you for custom designs and you will do a custom logo for them. I have also seen graphic designers create logos that you can purchase on Etsy and that they will customize for you. So it's a pre-done logo, and then the customer will come along and say, "Hey, my business name is Melissa's Illustrations," and you will go in, you'll create the logo with their business name. They've already purchased and agreed to the design. It's a pre-made design. You're just simply adding their name to it, and then you will send them all the files and everything. So that is another way that you can earn a living as a graphic designer on Etsy. If you are a photographer, you can sell prints of your work on Etsy. Art prints are another thing that people shop for a lot on Etsy. They need things to decorate their home. And so you can also do this from the point of view where you are selling it as a physical product. You actually produce the prints yourself, or you have a local printer produce them, and you ship them out to your customer. You might even frame them for them if that's something you want to offer. You can also sell digital copies of your prints. So the customer will purchase a digital version of your print it off at home, and they can put it on their wall. That's another way that as a photographer, you can earn a living on Etsy. So writers, this was one I had to look up because I was like, how would a writer make money on Etsy? But they do. I have seen writers who create things like lists of copywriting prompts that they sell. I have seen copywriting workbooks. I have also seen people offer blog and website content writing services. So all of those things are available. I'm just pulling this up right now. Copywriting on Etsy. 21 copywriting formulas done for you copywriting formula, the copywriter's handbook, copywriting templates for Instagram, blog and website content writer. So there's lots of ways that you could get yourself up on Etsy and reach a whole new group of people. I also did the same for music. And so there's somebody here selling personalized song lyrics. So if you wanted to create, if you wanted some lyrics for a special occasion for somebody, that would be another thing that you could do. So it is definitely worth taking a look if you're a creative services provider and seeing what other people are doing on Etsy and seeing if there's a way that you could create something that would sell in that kind of environment. And again, most of these are things that you could also sell on your own website. Okay, so we've talked about Etsy and some of the pros and cons of being on Etsy. Let's talk about having your own website. So if you are going to have a standalone website, there are basically two ways that you can do this. One is you use a done for you e-commerce, turnkey e-commerce platform that lets you get up and running very quickly. So this would be things like Shopify, WordPress with WooCommerce, Squarespace, Wix, Weebly. All of these will allow you to have your very own website with your own domain and easily turn it into a turnkey e-commerce store. So with sites like Shopify and Squarespace and I think Wix, I've never used Wix, so I can't speak with it with a ton of authority. In those instances, you are going to pay a monthly or annual fee to use their platform. So while you will have your own domain name and your own store, and it is your own store, it is being hosted by Shopify or by Squarespace. So you're not paying for a separate hosting account because they're doing that for you. They are also providing you with the platform, so you don't need to have somebody develop an e-commerce platform for you from scratch. You get to use theirs, and you can customize it using a variety of themes that are available. Some of them are free, some of them are paid, depending on what you want. You can also hire designers and developers to help you customize them even further. But essentially, at the end of the day, Shopify or Squarespace is responsible for the back end of that website. So this takes a lot of the IT work off of your plate. Now, if you were to go with something like WordPress with WooCommerce, WordPress works slightly differently. WordPress is essentially a software package that you install on your web host. So in that case, if you go with a WordPress site, you are going to have to find yourself a hosting company, and you're going to have to set up the WordPress software along with the WooCommerce, which is the e-commerce portion of the software, and you're going to have to set it up. And if there is an issue with it, it's going to be on you. The third way is that you design an e-commerce site from scratch with a developer, with a web developer. Very expensive, very expensive. Like, you can expect it to be tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. So that is not the direction most of us go when we're starting out. Most of us are going to go with something that is hosted for us, like Shopify or Squarespace, where it's pretty easy to get up and running. Or we're going to go with WooCommerce, where we have a little bit more control than we would with Shopify or Squarespace, but we're also going to be a little bit more involved in the day-to-day tech side of running that site. So I've had experience with all three of those sites. The And She Looked Up website is on Squarespace. My Fine Lime Designs services site is on WordPress. I have a lot of experience with WordPress. I used to be a WordPress designer, so I'm very comfortable with it. And my Fine Lime illustration shop is on Shopify. So I've used all three platforms. I am not a fan of Squarespace. I'm just going to say that right now. I really don't like it. I find it very limiting in the things that I can do. And as somebody who comes from the world of blogging, I am where WordPress is king. Virtually all bloggers use WordPress. I am used to having a tremendous amount of control over my website, particularly things like SEO and the look and feel of it and all of that stuff. And so I find Squarespace very limiting, and I get very frustrated with it. I find Shopify to be a little closer to what I'm used to on WordPress, but I still find it somewhat lacking from a SEO and blogging perspective. And blogging is a very important part of increasing your SEO and getting found online. You know, we talked about how Etsy does a lot of marketing for you, but when you have your own standalone website, the marketing is all on you. You have to figure out a way to get people to come to your site, and that's where blogging can really help you shine. It's a really great way to draw people to your website, and I find it very lacking on Squarespace, somewhat lacking on Shopify, and WordPress is definitely the platform of choice when it comes to using blogging as a marketing tool. Having said that, Shopify is so easy to get up and running compared to WordPress and WooCommerce. So that is why I went for it with my product shop and I'm very happy with that decision, minus the blogging piece. But from a services standpoint, I still find WooCommerce to be a much better platform for what I want to do. So you have a few different options there, but it's really important to understand that each option requires a different skill set. And in some cases, you may want to hire out for that skill set. I do have a developer that I work with who helps me with my WordPress site for the heavy lifting things that I'm not capable of doing. I also have a fantastic web host that I use. They're a Canadian site. I'll give them a little shout out, easyp.net. They're based here out of Vancouver, and I've been working with them for years now, and I love them. They're a fantastic group of people, and I've had really great customer service from them. So I use them as my WordPress host for my graphic design business and for a couple of blogs that I also run. So very happy with them. So as I alluded to, when you have your own standalone website, one of the biggest challenges you're going to face is getting people to your site. And this is the thing that a lot of people don't necessarily think about or realize is going to be such a challenge. And this is where you can have a newfound appreciation for places like Etsy or eBay, where they bring the customers to you. The next thing we need to talk about is fees, because as I mentioned earlier in the episode, there are fees every time you sell something on Etsy. And one of the things that people get very excited about when it comes to something like Shopify or Squarespace is the fact that there's no fees. Okay, yes, there's no transaction fees, but there are still fees. When you sign up for a platform like Shopify, no, they don't take a percentage of every sale, but you still have to pay payment processing fees. You're going to pay those on any platform. So that kind of cancels out the payment processing fees you pay on Etsy. Doesn't matter where you sell, you're going to have to pay payment processing fees. Yes, Etsy charges a transaction fee, a percentage of every transaction that you make on Etsy. And as I said, it's 6.5%. No, Shopify and I don't think Squarespace or Wix charge a transaction fee, but you do have to pay an annual fee to use these hosted standalone platforms like Shopify, like Wix, like Weebly. You don't have to pay an annual fee for WordPress, but I think you do have to pay a fee for WooCommerce. I could be wrong, but I think you do. But you're still going to have to pay a hosting fee on top of that. So you need to start looking at all these different fees and doing some math. You need to do some number crunching. I know that for a lot of us, we're creative because we don't want to do math, but if you're running a small business, you need to do math. So if Shopify has an annual fee of $300, and they have various different tiers, all of these platforms have different tiers with different fees, but the starter platform, I believe, is around $300, and I think that's the same for Squarespace. So I could be wrong, and those fees are going to change, so these numbers are not going to be current necessarily when you're listening to this. But it is a considerable annual fee, and you need to factor that in. The other thing that nobody really talks about with platforms like Shopify and WordPress is that a lot of the functionality you want doesn't necessarily come out of the box. So you have to purchase things like plugins when you're on WordPress, or they have a different word for them on Shopify. Apps. They call them apps on Shopify. And all of those cost money. They usually have a monthly fee here and there. So you might have 3 or 4 apps that you're paying $10 a month each to use. All of a sudden, that's $30 a month. You multiply that by 12, and that's $360 a year, plus your $300 fee to use Shopify. And all of a sudden, you're paying a lot of money. And if you start to do the math based on how many sales you're getting on the different platforms, all of a sudden those Etsy fees seem pretty reasonable. You're getting a lot of value for them. It's not to say that you're not getting value from the apps and plugins and things that you're paying for on your standalone website, but you do have to understand that it's not free in the way that you think it is. So it is really important to crunch your numbers and to crunch them regularly and just see how things are going. But all that to say is that there's no such thing as a free ride. Regardless of how you choose to sell online, you are going to be paying money to third parties all over the place. The Other big challenge you have to think about with a standalone website is actually bringing traffic to that website. Marketing is expensive. And as we talked about with Etsy, you are going to be selling on a marketplace that already has a huge, warm audience of people looking to buy. They are actively looking for what you make and what you sell. When you have your own standalone website, people don't know it exists. You have to figure out how to get them over to it. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can run ads on social media, Facebook ads, Instagram ads. That's a great way to build awareness. If you have an online presence, if you have a social media presence, you can bring people to your website through your Instagram account, your Facebook page. You can also integrate your Instagram account and your Facebook page with platforms like Shopify, so people can actually buy directly from you on Instagram without having to go to your website. So that's something else you could do. You can market to your email list, which is another reason why building an email list is so important. And that is very hard to do on Etsy. But when you have your own shop, it's a lot easier to sign people up for your list, especially if you're offering them a little incentive to do so. Another great way to get found is by blogging. One of the best ways to get found online is through SEO, search engine optimization. You want to use SEO to make it easier for your store to surface in Google search results. That's essentially what search engine optimization is. You are trying to optimize your website so that it is easily found by search engines and so that you are top of mind in quotation marks when Google returns results. But a lot of work has to go into that. And there's many, many factors that are involved. We could do a whole episode on SEO, and we probably should do a whole episode on SEO. And speaking of SEO, Etsy also requires SEO. Their SEO is a little different from what Google requires. So it's kind of a learning curve for each platform. But for an online shop, one of the ways that you can greatly improve your SEO is through blogging. Blogging is a great way to bring people to your store. Again, we could do I'm just thinking we could do a whole episode on blogging for SEO, blogging for product businesses. Maybe that's a good one to consider. But anyway, think of different ways that you can create blog posts that would be of interest to your target market. So for instance, one of the very first blog posts I posted on my website was 10 ways that you can repurpose a greeting card, because I sell greeting cards. Okay, so I want people who use greeting cards to come to my website. And I thought this would be a great post to kind of lure them in. And there's lots of other things you could do. So let's say you sell jewelry. Some great blog post ideas might be how to clean your engagement ring, or how to clean your earrings, or the best way to store your jewelry so that it always looks its best. Or you could even do something like 10 fashion forward jewelry trends we're seeing this spring. Again, that's something that people are searching for on Google. They're like, what's cool with jewelry this spring? So that would help bring them to your site. And of course, in that blog post, you're going to mention like, hey, you know what's really cool this year? Giant dangly hoop earrings. By the way, we sell giant dangly hoop earrings. Here's a link to our latest giant dangly hoop earring that we're selling. So that's the kind of thing that you want to do by bringing people in through things that they're already searching for. You have a way to direct them to the products that you sell. Maybe you sell a jewelry cleaner as well. So, hey, you're looking for ways to clean your jewelry? By the way, we sell our own in-house jewelry cleaner. It's perfect for this. So those are some great ways that you can bring people in. Another way you could do it if you are sell home decor is talk about home decor trends. 10 great ways that you can bring your living room to life with the color orange. Again, anything you have that's orange in your shop, you're going to want to highlight those items and how they can be used to bring a little bit of life to your living room this spring. So those are different ways that you can use blogging to help bring people to your website. You don't need to be blogging every single day. You don't even need to be blogging once a week, but maybe once a month. This is also a great way to show the search engines that you are constantly creating new content and there's new reasons to come to your website, especially if maybe your product assortment doesn't change that often. Blogging can be a great way to bring people in. So this is something you need to think about before you start your own standalone website is how am I going to get people to my website? Because they're not just going to show up. As I've mentioned before on the show, nobody just shows up at your door and knocks on it and says, hey, I want to buy some jewelry. It just doesn't happen. So you have to figure out how you're going to get those people to your website. One of the biggest pros to having your own standalone website, and one of the things that was very important to me, especially coming from retail, a retail background and a customer service background, was I really wanted to have more control over the entire customer experience. I wanted to decide whether or not I would offer free shipping and under what circumstances I would offer free shipping. Etsy will push you very hard to include free shipping on any size order. And there's a lot of conversation about whether or not that pushes you up higher in Etsy search results. And there's some evidence that it does. But again, I don't want Etsy to decide how I run my business. I want to decide how I run my business. And I do understand that when I sell on Etsy, I'm agreeing to their rules and the way that they want to do business. But I also want to have a place where I can do business on my terms. So I can decide whether or not I'm going to charge free shipping or at what threshold I'm going to charge free shipping. I get to decide what my refund policy is, and nobody is going to override me. When I sell on Etsy, Etsy has the ability to override my return policy. I don't want that to be the case. I want to be the one who has the final say. It's not to say that I'm a hard ass about refunds and returns, but I want to be the one who gets to make that decision. I want to be able to add customers to my email list. I want to be able to send them an email when I have a new launch coming out. I want to be able to offer them something really cool for being a loyal customer. I just want to have a lot more control over the entire process from start to finish. One of the things I don't like about Etsy is that when somebody goes to a listing of yours on Etsy. So let's say that you sell, in my case, greeting cards, and they come across the perfect birthday card. And on that, they're looking at the listing for it, they're reading it, and then as they scroll down, Etsy tells them, if you like this, you might also like these cards, and they're cards by other shops. So I want my customer on my site to be able to look at this perfect birthday card. And when they scroll down and it says, you might also like these other cards, I want those cards to be my cards. I want them to see other options available on my site. And that's another thing that I really like about having my own store is that I get to lay it out the way that I want in a way that makes it easier for them to browse my product, not all the products on Etsy. When they come to my store, they're only browsing things that I make. And so I have a better chance of upselling them or having a bigger shopping basket. Shopping basket is the term we use to refer to the full amount of a customer's order. So instead of buying one card from me, now they're more likely to buy 3 cards from me. And this is really interesting. I have a promotion on both Etsy and Shopify, where if they buy 3 cards, it's $18, which is a bit of a discount. The way that Etsy works, I have to offer that 3 cards for $18 as a separate listing, which most people never see. I can mention that I have this separate listing in my item descriptions, but a lot of them don't read the item descriptions. So it's really difficult to encourage them to buy in multiples. Whereas on my website, it's an automatic discount. As soon as 3 greeting cards hits their shopping cart, they automatically get the discount. And I'm able to have banners everywhere on the site where they might purchase a greeting card, letting them know that, hey, buy 3, it's $18. And so I do a lot better on Shopify with people buying in multiples than I do on Etsy because I have more ways to show them that they can buy in multiples and save money. And so I wind up with people spending more money, like a lot more money per purchase on my Shopify store than on my Etsy store. It's very common on Etsy for people to buy one card and that's it. On my Shopify store, most people spend at least $35 as opposed to the $7.99 that one card costs on my Etsy shop. So while I may not have quite as many purchases on Shopify yet, although it is starting to get close to what I sell on Etsy, the purchases that I do have are of much higher value. And that's because I control the entire shopping experience. And that's really important to me. So I think those are the kinds of things that you need to look at. So there's a lot of pros and cons to each of these different business models, each of these different selling models. But at the end of the day, the pros and cons are different. What makes Etsy a great platform is different from what makes a standalone website a great platform. And so I really do believe that there is a place for both of them. I am a big believer in multiple revenue streams. I never want to be in a situation where Etsy closes down my shop and I lose everything. Now, if something were to happen to my Etsy store, I have my own standalone website where I can direct people to, where I'm starting to have customers regularly shop now who used to shop on Etsy or who have found me through other channels. And so if something were to happen to my Etsy shop, my business could keep functioning. I wouldn't lose everything. The flip side is, on my Shopify store, I only sell to the US and Canada. There are a lot of new tax regulations and things coming into countries in Europe and in other parts of the world, and it's starting to become a little unwieldy to deal with all of those. But what I do like about Etsy is that for those more international customers, Etsy handles all of that for me. So while I sell to the US and Canada on my Shopify store, I sell internationally and to the US and Canada on Etsy. So there's a place where everybody can purchase from me and have a successful transaction. And I really like that. If for some reason Shopify were to have an issue and my site were to go down, I can redirect people to Etsy until my Shopify store is back up and running. So it's like building in some redundancy. It's like building in a backup system for your business so that if something happens on one end, you still have this other end that can keep functioning. And I think that's really important for us as business owners, is to never be in a situation where one thing could shut down your business. Instead, now for my business to be shut down, multiple things have to go wrong. It could still happen, but it's a lot less likely to have the same kind of impact on me than if I just had one revenue stream. So I think it's really important to consider this. There are other revenue streams that you could also look at. There are things like wholesale, which again would be a great episode to do. There are other platforms like eBay and Amazon Handmade, which are kind of different from what we've talked about here, but could still be a great extra source of revenue for you. There's sites like Poshmark for those of you who might be into vintage. There's also platforms like Gumroad and Thrivecart where you can sell digital downloads and things like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can earn revenue, and I think it's worth at least exploring them all. I'm not saying you need to do all the things. I'm not even saying you should have an Etsy shop and a Shopify store right now. If you're just starting out, it's really hard to start two platforms from scratch. So I would highly recommend, if you're in the early stages, pick one and get yourself up and running on there and have things start ticking along to the point where you feel comfortable. It can take a little while to get comfortable with shipping, and it can take a little while with getting comfortable with just the whole flow of how orders come in and how you fill them and how you pack them and how you get them out the door. So get comfortable with that on one platform and then open a second platform and repeat the process. It's a lot easier on your mental health that way. And it's just a lot easier to get into a flow. And as I mentioned, if you are a creative services provider, start looking at both of these options as a way that you could potentially bring in a new stream of revenue or an additional stream of revenue that maybe you hadn't thought of. I do believe that all service providers have something that they could turn into a tangible product. I do this, I'm in the process of doing this right now in my graphic design business. I am in the process of creating templates and also an ebook that I will be able to sell as an actual product on my website and potentially even on other market spaces like Creative Market and things that are specifically for things like templates and design resources and things like that. So always be looking for interesting ways that you can add another stream of revenue. So I think this is really important. Give your business a little backup protection in case something goes wrong. So you're never in a position where you're going to lose everything all at once. That is it for this week. I hope I covered everything. I think in some places I was a little bit all over the place. It's just my brain was working faster than my mouth. Which usually it's the other way around. My mouth usually works faster than my brain. But in this case, my brain was working faster than my mouth. And so if I missed anything for either of these platforms, let me know. You can DM me on Instagram or leave a message on one of our social media posts, or you can comment on the show notes or send me an email at andshelookedup@gmail.com. And there will be a link to the show notes in your podcast player of choice. So that is it for this week, everybody. I hope this was helpful. I hope it gave you some things to think about, and maybe changed your mind on whether or not you should investigate some of these platforms that you aren't using, and give you some opportunities to earn some extra money doing what you love to do. So that's it for this week, everybody. We'll be back soon with another brand new episode, and we'll talk to you all then. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshelookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshelookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshelookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.